In a quiet suburban neighborhood bathed in the soft glow of early autumn, life seemed to move at a gentle pace, a stark contrast to the tempest of secrets and memories hidden behind closed doors. The leaves, painted in hues of amber and gold, whispered the passage of time as they danced in the breeze, setting a serene yet haunting stage for a story that was about to unravel. At the heart of this peaceful enclave lived Emily, a bright-eyed little girl whose innocence was as delicate as the petals of a spring blossom. Her laughter echoed through the streets like a cherished melody, filling the air with hope and unspoken dreams. Emily's world was one of wonder, where every day was an adventure waiting to be discovered. But beneath the surface of this idyllic setting lay a story of unyielding determination and guarded pasts. Jack Stevens, Emily's father, was no ordinary man. A battle-hardened war veteran with scars that ran deeper than the physical, Jack carried the weight of a storied past, a past marked by courage, loss, and a relentless drive to protect what mattered most. His eyes, etched with memories of distant conflicts, reflected both the pain of yesterday and the promise of a safer tomorrow for his daughter. The neighborhood, once a sanctuary of peace, had recently begun to stir with an undercurrent of tension. Rumors of unruly troublemakers and ominous figures began to circulate, casting long shadows over the community's tranquil facade. Yet, amidst this brewing storm, Emily's laughter continued, a beacon of light in the encroaching darkness. Jack, ever watchful and resolute, vowed silently to shield his daughter from the encroaching threat no matter the cost. This narrative is not merely about the clash between innocence and malevolence. It is a tale of redemption, of a father's fierce commitment to justice, and of a community on the brink of awakening. The calm before the storm is palpable, as the stage is set for a confrontation that promises to shake the very foundations of this quiet town. In the days to come, as whispers of discontent grow louder, and the once peaceful streets prepare for an inevitable upheaval, one truth remains clear. The fight to protect what is dear is a battle fought not only on the outside, but within the very soul of those who dare to stand against the darkness. The early light of dawn broke over the quiet suburban streets, as the day began with a gentle hum of life. In this town, every face was familiar, and every story intertwined with the rhythm of daily routines. Yet behind the familiar smiles and morning greetings lay the quiet determination of a man whose past was as formidable as the battles he once fought. Jack Stevens woke before sunrise, his routine as methodical as the drills of his military days. The house was still cloaked in the soft murmur of sleep, its walls holding echoes of whispered promises and long-held secrets. As he prepared a modest breakfast for himself and his daughter, he allowed his mind a brief moment of reflection. Memories of far-off lands and the sound of distant artillery that still haunted his dreams. Those days were behind him now, replaced by the singular focus of ensuring that Emily's world remained untouched by the shadows of his past. Emily, a vivacious and curious 7-year-old, was the light of his life. With her untamed curls and eyes that sparkled like dew in the morning sun, she brought warmth to every corner of their modest home. The sounds of her cheerful chatter filled the rooms, weaving a tapestry of innocence and hope that stood in stark contrast to the memories of Jack's own turbulent experiences. While Jack's past was etched in scars and silent resolve, Emily's future was wide open, a promise of renewal and the embodiment of a new beginning. At breakfast, the conversation was simple yet profound in its unspoken meaning. "Daddy, will we go to the park today?" Emily asked, her voice lilting with excitement. Jack's smile was gentle but resolute as he replied, "Of course, sweetheart. Today is a day for adventures." In that exchange, the weight of unspoken vows to protect and cherish the innocence of youth was palpable, a silent pact that transcended words. Outside, the neighborhood stirred to life. Neighbors exchanged pleasantries over white picket fences, and the soft murmur of lawnmowers and distant laughter filled the air. But amid this bucolic charm, there were subtle hints that not all was well. Jack's instincts, honed by years of facing danger, picked up on whispered conversations and furtive glances exchanged by a few residents. There was talk, quiet murmurs in the background of everyday life, of minor disturbances and unsavory characters seen lurking in the peripheries of the community. Yet, most dismissed these as isolated incidents, remnants of a world that existed far beyond the safe confines of the neighborhood. As the morning unfolded, Jack took Emily for a walk around the block, his eyes scanning every detail with careful precision. The familiar route was now laced with a new awareness, The park, usually a haven of laughter and playful shouts, seemed subdued, its benches bearing silent witness to a recent tension. A couple of teenagers, dressed in baggy jeans and hoodies, loitered near the entrance, their eyes a little too watchful, their demeanor hinting at unspoken intentions. Jack's gaze lingered a moment longer on them before he gently steered Emily away. It was a small, instinctive act, a silent message that even in a world that appeared serene, caution was necessary. Back home, the day advanced with routine chores and small acts of normalcy that belied the undercurrent of unease. Jack meticulously went about his tasks, yet his mind was ever alert to the slightest anomaly, a misplaced footprint on the porch, a faint sound outside in the dead of the afternoon. His vigilance was not born of paranoia, but of a profound sense of responsibility. The stakes were too high to leave anything to chance. In the quiet solitude of the afternoon, Jack retreated to his study, a room lined with books and memories of his past life. There, he reviewed the local news, his eyes scanning headlines with a mix of concern and resolve. Reports of petty crimes, though seemingly minor, painted a picture of a community slowly unraveling at the edges, and while law enforcement worked diligently to maintain order, Jack knew that sometimes the most dangerous threats were the ones that went unnoticed until it was too late. Throughout the day, interactions with neighbors subtly reinforced his concerns. Mrs. Peterson, a kind elderly lady known for her daily walks, mentioned how she had seen unfamiliar faces lingering near the community center. Mr. Rodriguez, the local handyman, muttered about a spike in vandalism that had left his tools scattered and equipment damaged. Each remark, each casual observation, wove together a tapestry of unease that Jack could not ignore. That evening, as the sky deepened into shades of twilight and the first stars began to twinkle, Jack sat on the back porch, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Emily played quietly nearby, unaware of the silent battles her father fought. In those reflective moments, Jack resolved to act. The creeping threat might have been cloaked in the mundane, but for him, every whisper of discontent was a call to safeguard the fragile peace of their little world. Jack's determination was clear. The well-being of his daughter, and by extension the community, demanded more than just quiet vigilance. It demanded proactive steps to ensure that darkness would never again seep into the light of innocent lives. As dawn broke once more over the quiet suburb, the first hints of unease had already settled into the fabric of daily life. While the neighborhood's exterior maintained its calm, beneath the surface, subtle conflicts were stirring. Jack Stevens, still reeling from the morning's unsettling observations, couldn't shake the feeling that the threat was growing bolder. The day promised routine activities, yet for him, every moment carried an undercurrent of urgency. At school drop-off, as Emily waved goodbye to a smiling teacher, Jack's gaze wandered to a cluster of unfamiliar vehicles parked at the far end of the block. Their presence was out of place, and the sight rekindled a simmering worry that he had felt earlier. Determined to understand the anomaly, Jack made a mental note to visit the local community center later that day, a place where residents gathered and shared whispers of what they'd seen and heard. Over the following hours, life moved in a paradoxical dance of normalcy and tension. Emily's classroom buzzed with the innocent chatter of childhood, oblivious to the undercurrents of menace that haunted her father's mind. Meanwhile, Jack met briefly with Mr. Rodriguez, the handyman, who confided that odd, inexplicable disturbances were becoming more frequent. Tools misplaced, minor vandalism. These were no longer isolated incidents. The community, once united by a sense of security, was now slowly unraveling as fear began to seep in. At the community center that afternoon, Jack found himself among concerned neighbors discussing the latest incidents. Mrs. Peterson's soft voice trembled as she recounted seeing suspicious figures lingering around the playground just hours before. The assembled crowd murmured in agreement, each story knitting together a tapestry of escalating tension. Jack listened intently, his military-honed instincts scanning each detail. Every remark, every subtle shift in tone, pointed to a network of discontent and latent hostility that had managed to go unnoticed until now. It wasn't long before Jack's investigative nature took over. After the meeting, he lingered, striking up quiet conversations with residents who had observed unusual activities. One neighbor, a young father named Michael, admitted that his teenage son had mentioned a secret meeting at a nearby abandoned lot, a detail that sent a ripple of concern through Jack's mind. Was this a coordinated effort among local delinquents, or did it hint at something more sinister beneath the surface? Later that evening, as twilight draped the neighborhood in muted colors, Jack revisited the abandoned lot. His approach was methodical and cautious. His heart pounded with a mixture of resolve and the lingering ghosts of past battles. Hidden behind a cluster of overgrown shrubs, he overheard voices, snatches of conversation that alluded to planned acts of defiance against what they perceived as a corrupt system. The words were laced with anger, desperation, and a misguided sense of retribution. While Jack could not make out every detail, it was clear that the seeds of conflict were being sown, and the ramifications could extend far beyond petty vandalism. In the solitude of his car, parked at a discreet distance, Jack wrestled with a tumult of emotions. His protective instinct for Emily battled with a desire to understand the motivations of these young radicals. There was a spark of empathy in his mind. Perhaps some of them were victims of circumstances, pushed to the margins of society. Yet, the safety of his daughter and the integrity of his community demanded decisive action. His internal conflict deepened as he considered the implications. Any inaction might allow a full-scale eruption of violence, endangering the fragile peace that everyone longed for. That night, while Emily slept peacefully, Jack sat at his kitchen table, reviewing the fragments of information he'd gathered. His eyes drifted over scribbled notes and hastily recorded observations. The pages bore the weight of his concern and determination. With each line, the disparate pieces of the puzzle began to coalesce into a clearer picture, a network of discontent festering on the outskirts of the community. The realization was both disheartening and galvanizing. Jack knew that in order to protect the innocent, he had to confront not only the overt threats, but also the underlying currents that fueled them. As the evening deepened, Jack's thoughts turned inward, reflecting on his own past. A past where battles were fought on foreign soil under orders, where moral ambiguities blurred the lines between duty and sacrifice. Tonight, however, the battlefield was his own neighborhood, and the enemy was not just a group of misguided youths, but an emerging system of neglect and hidden grievances. His mission was no longer about avenging a minor misdeed. It had transformed into a quest to restore balance, protect the vulnerable, and mend the fractures tearing his community apart. By midnight, as the town slumbered under a quiet, star-strewn sky, Jack made a silent vow. Tomorrow, he would take further steps, seeking alliances, gathering more intelligence, and preparing himself for the inevitable confrontation. He understood that the road ahead was fraught with uncertainty, yet his resolve was unshakable. The safety of his daughter, the well-being of his neighbors, and the sanctity of their shared home depended on his courage to face the growing darkness. Jack's investigation took an unexpected turn one chilly evening as he pored over the fragments of information he'd gathered. After days of discreet stakeouts and hushed conversations with wary informants, a single detail began to stand out, a recurring emblem seen on the jackets of some of the local troublemakers. It was an insignia that stirred long-buried memories of his military past. One night, while hidden behind a thicket near the abandoned lot, Jack recorded a whispered conversation among a small group of youths. Their dialogue was punctuated by coded phrases and references that didn't quite fit the profile of mere juvenile delinquency. As he strained to catch every word, a particular name surfaced: Colonel Harris. The name hit him like a sudden downpour. Harris, a once revered officer under whom Jack had served, had long since vanished from the public eye. According to the fragmented recollections that Jack held of his military days, Harris had been a man of strict honor and discipline. Yet now, that same name was emerging from the lips of these disaffected youths, linking them to a past Jack thought he had left behind. In a flash of recollection, Jack's mind spiraled back to a fateful operation years ago. Under Colonel Harris's command, Jack had led a mission that saved countless lives. The operation, however, had ended in controversy. Harris's decisions were later questioned, and his reputation tarnished. The bitterness of that fallout had never left Jack, though he had long tried to bury it beneath his new life of vigilance and protection. Now the revelation that Harris was somehow involved in the chaos unraveling in his neighborhood was a personal betrayal that cut deep. Determined to verify his suspicions, Jack sought out an old comrade who had since left the military and settled in the area as a security consultant. In a dimly lit parking lot behind a nearly deserted service station, the man, Tom, a once trusted ally, revealed a truth that shocked Jack to his core. "I heard whispers," Tom said in a low, trembling tone, "that Colonel Harris isn't done with the game. He's been seen around town, meeting with local figures who have troubled histories. They say he's orchestrating more than just random acts of vandalism. It's all part of a calculated plan." As Tom spoke, images of the past and present collided in Jack's mind. The scattered acts of intimidation, the carefully staged meetings in abandoned lots, and the seemingly sporadic signs of unrest now formed a coherent picture, a blueprint of chaos engineered by someone who once stood for honor. Colonel Harris, whose name was now associated with a shadowy network of discontent, had transformed from a mentor into an architect of rebellion. It wasn't just about the petty crimes or minor disturbances. It was an orchestrated assault on the very fabric of the community. Jack's pulse quickened as he recalled a particular moment from the overheard conversation, a reference to setting the board and the first move. Those phrases, used by someone with intimate knowledge of military strategy, hinted at a larger design. It became clear that the disturbances were mere diversions, deliberate maneuvers to weaken community ties and undermine local authority. In the back of his mind, Jack knew that if Colonel Harris was truly behind this, the stakes were far higher than he'd ever anticipated. Haunted by the realization that his own past was colliding with his present, Jack revisited the site of his earlier stakeouts. With renewed determination, he scoured the area for any evidence that might further link the gang's activities to Harris's long-forgotten insignia. His careful search paid off when he discovered a discarded jacket near a hidden doorway, its fabric marked unmistakably by the emblem of Harris's old regiment. The relic, weathered by time and the elements, served as undeniable proof that the trouble wasn't merely the work of local misfits. It was the calculated move of a man with a grudge. The weight of this discovery settled over Jack like a shroud. The betrayal was twofold. Not only was his community under threat from rising unrest, but someone from his own past, the very man he had once trusted, had emerged as the mastermind behind it all. The revelation ignited a potent mix of sorrow and anger in him. Harris's transformation from a disciplined leader to a shadowy puppet master manipulating troubled youths was a stark, personal affront. It forced Jack to confront memories of camaraderie, honor, and the bitter taste of betrayal. In that moment, Jack realized that his mission was no longer solely about protecting his daughter and preserving community peace. It had evolved into a quest to reclaim his own past, to rectify the distortions that had turned a respected leader into a vengeful conspirator. The stakes were now intensely personal, and the battle lines drawn in the quiet streets of his neighborhood were charged with decades of unresolved history. With the evidence in hand and his resolve hardened, Jack resolved to dismantle Colonel Harris's network from within. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but every step was driven by a singular burning purpose: to expose the man who had betrayed the sacred bond of trust and honor. As the chill of the night deepened and the sounds of distant unrest echoed in the darkness, Jack steeled himself for the confrontation that would soon follow, a confrontation where the past and present would collide in an epic showdown for the soul of his community. The revelation of Colonel Harris's involvement sent shockwaves through Jack's inner circle and the community at large. As the truth began to surface, each character had to confront the unsettling collision of their past loyalties with a present that now threatened everything they held dear. Jack sat alone in the dim light of his study, the discarded jacket with the emblem of Harris still fresh in his mind. His hands trembled slightly as he recalled the name and the painful memories that it evoked. The betrayal stung deeply. Not only had his trusted mentor turned rogue, but he had also endangered the fragile peace of the neighborhood. In that heavy silence, Jack resolved that he would not let his personal history paralyze his sense of duty. Instead, he would channel his anguish into a focused determination to bring the truth to light. Across town, Tom, the security consultant and former comrade, wrestled with conflicting emotions. The news of Harris's covert involvement had rattled him as well. Tom had once admired Harris's strategic mind and unyielding discipline, but now he found himself questioning everything he had believed in. In a tense phone call with Jack later that evening, Tom's voice wavered. "Jack, I can't believe it. Harris was our guide, our beacon of order. How could he allow himself to become this orchestrator of chaos?" His words hung in the air, laden with both disbelief and sorrow. Jack's response was steady, though his heart pounded with the weight of their shared history. "Tom, we have to face it, however bitter it might be. We need to adjust our plans and work from within to dismantle this network that Harris has built." Their conversation ended with a mutual promise to dig deeper and safeguard the community from the impending storm. Meanwhile, the community's response was as varied as it was intense. At the local community center, where concerned residents had gathered earlier, murmurs grew louder when whispers of Harris's name began circulating. Mrs. Peterson, an elderly widow known for her gentle wisdom, clutched her shawl tighter and looked around nervously. "I remember when things were simpler," she confided to a neighbor, her voice trembling with both nostalgia and fear. "Now, even the past is turning against us. Who knew that a man we once respected could become the architect of our troubles?" In a small coffee shop near the community center, a group of residents debated the situation in hushed tones. One middle-aged man, Mr. Daniels, voiced a sentiment that resonated with many. "This isn't just about petty crimes anymore. If Harris is behind this, it means we're facing a calculated, dangerous enemy. We need to rally together. This community can't afford to be divided." His words ignited a spark of resolve among his peers, and soon ideas were exchanged about organizing neighborhood patrols and improving communication channels with local law enforcement. The atmosphere was a blend of fear, indignation, and cautious optimism, a collective readiness to confront an enemy they now recognized as both external and all too personal. Back at home, Jack struggled to balance the heavy burden of protecting his daughter with the mounting pressure of his newfound mission. He could see the innocence in Emily's eyes, blissfully unaware of the dark forces gathering around them. Yet, in quiet moments when she played in the living room, Jack's heart ached with the knowledge that the world outside was rapidly changing. He began to prepare Emily in subtle ways, teaching her to be alert and cautious, without shattering the veneer of her carefree childhood. "It's important to look after one another," he would say, his tone gentle yet laden with a gravity that belied the simplicity of his words. Emily's teacher, Mrs. Carter, noticed a shift in the community's mood. At a parent-teacher meeting, she expressed concern about the growing tension. "We must be careful to shield our children from fear," she urged, her eyes scanning the room. "Our community has always been strong because we support one another. Now more than ever, we need that unity." Her remarks resonated with many parents, who began to plan community events aimed at reinforcing their collective bonds. As days passed, Jack's world became a delicate balancing act. His interactions with neighbors and old friends grew increasingly charged with the undercurrent of betrayal and uncertainty. The once familiar faces now carried expressions of worry, and the simple act of a friendly greeting had taken on a new significance, a silent acknowledgement of the shared responsibility to protect their community. Late one night, Jack found himself in a quiet park, the same place where he had once spent carefree hours with Emily. The cool night air was filled with a quiet determination, as if the darkness itself was listening to the resolve of a man ready to fight for what was right. In that moment, Jack realized that the adjustments everyone was making, be it in their personal lives, in their neighborhoods, or in their understanding of loyalty, were all steps toward a larger, more collective battle. The community's strength was being forged in the crucible of adversity, and even though the revelation of Harris's betrayal had sown seeds of doubt and fear, it also galvanized those who cared deeply for one another. As Jack looked up at the starlit sky, he silently vowed to navigate these turbulent times with unwavering resolve. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with emotional dilemmas and the challenge of reuniting a fractured community. Yet he knew that together they would adapt, rally, and ultimately confront the shadows that threatened to engulf their once peaceful haven. As the days wore on, the community began to feel the ripple effects of the emerging threat on multiple fronts. Jack's discovery about Colonel Harris had opened a Pandora's box, one that not only threatened the neighborhood's safety, but also unearthed hidden grievances, rivalries, and secrets that had long been simmering beneath the surface. One of the first new complications came from an unexpected quarter. At a neighborhood watch meeting, a young mother named Lisa revealed that her estranged brother, Derek, a local troublemaker known for his fiery temper and past run-ins with the law, had returned to town. Rumor had it that Derek was not simply trying to mend old fences. Instead, he might have been drawn into Harris's network. His return added a layer of personal drama to the already charged atmosphere. Lisa's eyes glistened with worry as she confided in Jack. "I never thought I'd see him again, especially not under these circumstances. I'm terrified that his presence might fuel more trouble, or worse, that he's in deeper than we know." Jack's protective instincts surged as he vowed to keep an eye on Derek, aware that personal conflicts could quickly escalate into broader confrontations. Simultaneously, another subplot began to unfold at the community center. A group of teenagers, once mere bystanders in the unfolding drama, found themselves at the crossroads of rebellion and redemption. Marcus, a naturally curious but troubled teen, had inadvertently become entangled in the gang's operations. His closest friends, including Jasmine and Tyler, were being lured by promises of camaraderie and a sense of purpose from those promising a radical new order. But Marcus harbored doubts. Late one evening, as he sat in a secluded corner of the community center, he confided in Jasmine, "I don't feel right about what's happening. They talk about revolution like it's some grand adventure, but I see the hurt and the fear in people's eyes." Jasmine, torn between loyalty to her friends and her own moral compass, remained silent, her eyes filled with uncertainty. This internal conflict among the youth hinted at a larger struggle, one where the seeds of rebellion could either blossom into something dangerous or be harnessed for a genuine change if guided correctly. Meanwhile, a long-standing dispute between two families in the neighborhood began to resurface. The Whitmans and the Clarks had been at odds for years over a piece of land that both families claimed held sentimental and historical value. With the current crisis casting its dark shadow, old wounds were reopened. During a heated encounter at a local diner, Mr. Whitman accused Mr. Clark of exploiting the turmoil for personal gain. "You always had a knack for stirring trouble, and now you're using this chaos to settle your score," he thundered. "Mr. Clark retorted defensively, "I'm not the one using our children's future as collateral for your vendetta." Their argument, which might have been forgotten in quieter times, now threatened to escalate into a confrontation that could further destabilize the fragile sense of community. Jack Eo, caught in the middle of these burgeoning subplots, felt the weight of responsibility grow heavier. His investigation was no longer a solitary mission. It had evolved into a multifaceted effort to manage a community teetering on the brink. One evening, as he pored over his notes in his study, he found himself reflecting on the interconnectedness of these challenges. Each subplot, the return of Derek Suss, the moral dilemmas of the local youth, and the reignited family feud, served as a reminder that the threat posed by Harris's network was not isolated. It was a catalyst that stirred latent conflicts and revealed vulnerabilities in the community's social fabric. Seeking to bring some order to the chaos, Jack organized a secret meeting with trusted allies, including Tom, Lisa, and a few other concerned residents. Under the cloak of night, in the back room of a nearly deserted community hall, they discussed their strategy. "We have to address these issues on multiple fronts," Jack explained. "It's not enough to stop the gang. We must also heal the rifts among us." Tom nodded in agreement, adding, "Our community is like a patchwork quilt. When one part unravels, the whole thing is at risk. We need to bring everyone together, even those with past grievances." Lisa, her voice soft yet determined, urged, "We must find a way to reach out to those who have drifted towards darkness, like Derek. Maybe if we can reconnect with them, we can turn them away from Harris's influence." The conversation continued deep into the night as plans were drafted not only to gather further intelligence on Harris's operations, but also to mend the community's internal fractures. In a poignant moment later that week, Jack encountered Marcus on a quiet street after dusk. The teenager looked lost, caught between conflicting allegiances. "Marcus, I know things are confusing right now," Jack said gently, "but you have a choice. You can be part of the solution, not the problem." Marcus hesitated, his eyes reflecting both pain and hope, as if this conversation might offer him a way out of the darkness. It was a small but significant moment of connection, a glimpse that redemption might be possible even in the midst of widespread turmoil. As these diverse challenges interwove, the community's struggle against the external threat of Harris's network became increasingly complex. Every personal story, every lingering grudge, and every wavering allegiance added to the mounting tension. Jack knew that to truly protect the neighborhood, he had to address these internal divisions head-on. The task was daunting, but the stakes had never been higher. With each subplot, the battle for the soul of the community grew not just in intensity, but in its breadth. setting the stage for even greater confrontations in the days to come. In the aftermath of the secret meeting, tensions within the community surged to unprecedented levels. Emotions ran high as each person struggled with conflicting loyalties and personal demons. Jack Wass, now at the center of a web of fractured relationships, found himself navigating not only the external threat of Harris's network, but also the intricate, often painful, dynamics within his own circle and among his neighbors. Late one evening, in the shadow of a nearly empty community center, Jack met privately with Tom. The low hum of a flickering fluorescent light set the stage for a raw, honest conversation. "Tom," Jack began, his voice heavy with both resolve and regret, "I can't help but feel that we're caught in a storm where every decision forces us to compromise on something we hold dear." Tom's eyes, reflecting years of shared hardship, narrowed as he responded, "I know, Jack. It's not just about stopping Harris. It's about saving the parts of ourselves that we've lost along the way." Their conversation, laced with memories of old missions and personal sacrifices, revealed a mutual understanding. The battle ahead was as much about inner redemption as it was about external justice. Meanwhile, at home, Jack's relationship with Emily faced its own emotional trials. As he prepared dinner in their modest kitchen, he watched his daughter's carefree chatter, a stark contrast to the turmoil swirling around him. Emily's innocent questions about the strange looks from neighbors or the hushed conversations she overheard weighed on him. "Daddy, why do people seem so sad lately?" she asked one evening, her eyes wide with a blend of curiosity and concern. Jack's heart clenched. He wished he could shield her completely from the world's darker edges. "Sometimes, sweetheart," he replied softly, "people are hurt by things they can't easily fix. But we have to remember that even in sadness, there's a chance for hope." His words were both a balm and a burden, a promise that even if the world was fractured, love and hope could still mend its seams. In the midst of these personal battles, the community itself was a microcosm of broader emotional struggles. At a local diner, a heated exchange unfolded between Mr. Whitman and Mr. Clark. Their long-standing feud, which had erupted once again under the current crisis, was more than a simple squabble over land. It was a manifestation of deeper wounds and a lifetime of unspoken grievances. "You always knew how to fan the flames, Clark," Mr. Whitman accused bitterly. "And you, Whitman, always pretended to be the righteous one, while behind your back you'd stoop to every low." Their voices escalated until a few intervening neighbors managed to separate them, leaving behind a residue of anger and sorrow that seemed to seep into every corner of the diner. Elsewhere, Marcus, the conflicted teenager, wrestled with his internal turmoil. After an intense argument with friends who were firmly aligned with Harris's radical ideology, Marcus sought solace in an unexpected place, a small, quiet park bench where an older gentleman named Mr. Jenkins often sat. Mr. Jenkins, once a respected figure in the community, with a past of his own full of triumphs and regrets, offered Marcus a listening ear. "I've seen many young souls caught in the grip of anger and confusion," Mr. Jenkins confided in a gentle tone. "Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are within ourselves. It's okay to question, to falter. Just don't let that question turn into a reason to lose who you truly are." His words, tender yet profound, resonated deeply with Marcus, planting a seed of hope that perhaps his path need not be one of destruction. Simultaneously, Lisa, grappling with the return of her estranged brother Derek, found herself torn between familial love and a duty to the community. One crisp evening, she met Derek on a quiet sidewalk, his posture a mix of defiance and vulnerability. "Lisa," he said, voice low, "I didn't come back to cause trouble. I needed to see if I could still be a part of this family." Lisa's heart softened, but the scars of past conflicts made trust a fragile commodity. "Derek, I want to believe you," she whispered, "but you need to understand that every action has consequences. If you choose to be part of Harris's plan, then you're choosing a path that could hurt all of us." Their exchange, full of unspoken apologies and regret, underscored the painful reality that personal redemption and community safety were intertwined in a delicate balance. Back at the community center, the emotional landscape was equally turbulent. Neighbors huddled in small groups, sharing fears and fragments of hope in equal measure. The energy was raw, the room charged with an undercurrent of collective grief and determination. Mrs. Peterson, ever the gentle matriarch, offered quiet words of comfort, urging those around her to remember the strength of unity. "We must hold on to each other," she said softly, "for it is together that we find the courage to face even the darkest of nights." In this crucible of conflicting emotions, every individual was forced to confront their vulnerabilities. Jack, Tom, Emily, Marcus, Lisa, and even the bitter rivals at the diner were all part of a larger narrative, a tapestry of human frailty and resilience. Each interaction, fraught with pain and hope, highlighted the profound emotional dilemmas that lay at the heart of the struggle against the looming threat. Jack knew that the path ahead was not just a physical confrontation with Harris's network. It was an odyssey of healing and self-discovery. As he closed his eyes that night, the echo of every whispered conversation, every tearful apology, and every quiet act of courage filled his mind. The battle for his community was as much about mending broken hearts as it was about confronting external chaos. And in that realization lay the strength to continue fighting, not just for safety, but for the redemption of every soul caught in the tide of conflict. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface of the neighborhood finally erupted in a series of events that left everyone reeling. Over the course of several days, small incidents escalated into larger disturbances, and a palpable sense of unease spread like wildfire through the community. One cool, overcast afternoon, while Jack was reviewing his notes at the local library, a commotion erupted outside. A group of teenagers, Marcus among them, had gathered near the entrance, their voices raised in heated debate. Jack's eyes narrowed as he caught fragments of their conversation. They spoke in hurried whispers about a secret meeting scheduled at an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town, a location that had long been rumored to serve as a hideout for those linked to Harris's shadowy network. The mention of the warehouse sent a chill down his spine. It wasn't merely about vandalism or petty crimes anymore. This was a coordinated effort that hinted at something far more sinister. Determined to uncover the truth, Jack discreetly followed the group after the library. The path led him through twisting back alleys and deserted streets until he reached a graffiti-stained wall near the warehouse. Here, the atmosphere shifted dramatically, the air thick with anticipation, as if the very night was holding its breath. Jack's heart pounded as he observed shadowy figures slipping into the building, their movements coordinated and almost ritualistic. A flicker of doubt crossed his mind. Were these individuals merely misguided youths, or were they pawns in a larger, meticulously planned operation orchestrated by Colonel Harris himself? Inside the warehouse, hushed voices echoed off the cold, concrete walls. Jack, hidden in the darkness, strained to make out their words. Instead of the chaotic chatter he had expected, there was a measured, almost military precision in their dialogue. "The plan is set," one voice intoned. "Tonight, we send a message." Another added, "The first move has been made. Soon, the board will be ours." The cryptic nature of these statements suggested that the disturbances in the community were only the beginning, a prelude to something far more organized and dangerous. As the meeting continued, subtle details began to emerge. A young woman whose eyes darted nervously between the gathered group and a large, tattered map pinned to the wall pointed to several key locations in the town. "These are the weak points," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. "Once we control these areas, there will be no turning back." Jack's mind raced, connecting the dots between the strategic locations and the previous incidents he had witnessed. It was clear that Harris's network was not operating on a whim. They were executing a deliberate plan aimed at destabilizing the very fabric of the community. Outside the warehouse, the tension escalated further. A patrol car, its lights flashing intermittently, passed by, an unspoken reminder that local law enforcement was now aware of something amiss. The sound of distant sirens blended with the murmurs of the onlookers, creating a symphony of impending conflict. In that charged moment, the stakes of the unfolding drama became unmistakably clear. The peaceful existence that the community had long taken for granted was under threat, and the upcoming confrontation promised to reshape the neighborhood's destiny. In the days that followed, rumors spread like wildfire. Neighbors whispered about seeing mysterious figures patrolling the streets at night, and there were unsettling reports of deliberate acts of sabotage, traffic lights malfunctioning, street signs being knocked askew, and even public announcements being hacked to display cryptic warnings. Each incident, though seemingly isolated, contributed to a growing sense of dread. The community's trust in its safety was crumbling, replaced by fear and suspicion. Jack, now more determined than ever, began to piece together a broader picture of the impending threat. His conversations with Tom and other trusted allies revealed that these acts were designed to erode the public's faith in the authorities. "They want to create chaos," Tom confided during a late-night meeting. "If people can't rely on the system to protect them, they'll be forced to take matters into their own hands, and that's when Harris's plan can truly take root." At home, the escalating tension weighed heavily on Jack. Every unexpected sound, every furtive glance exchanged among neighbors, deepened his resolve to act swiftly. He started preparing contingency plans not just to confront Harris's network, but to safeguard the community's vulnerable members. Emily's laughter, once a carefree melody, now carried an undercurrent of worry as she sensed her father's growing anxiety. Jack reassured her in gentle tones, masking his inner turmoil with the calm of a seasoned veteran. As twilight fell one evening, casting long shadows over the quiet streets, Jack stood at his window and watched the community prepare for an uncertain night. The signs were unmistakable. The convergence of small, deliberate actions and cryptic warnings hinted at an orchestrated uprising. Somewhere in the darkness, the seeds of a full-blown confrontation were being sown, and Jack knew that it was only a matter of time before those seeds sprouted into a storm that would engulf them all. In the days that followed the ominous meeting at the warehouse, the ripple effects of the impending uprising began to interweave the lives of the community's residents more tightly than ever before. Jack's investigation continued in parallel with the unfolding dramas among his neighbors, as old grievances and new alliances emerged to shape the collective response to the looming threat. Lisa, still troubled by her brother Derek's unexpected return, found herself at a crossroads. Determined to prevent Derek from being drawn further into Harris's web, she arranged a quiet meeting with him at a small, inconspicuous cafe on the edge of town. The low murmur of conversations provided a subtle cover as Lisa gently probed into his recent activities. "Derek," she began softly, "I know things haven't been easy, but I'm worried about the company you're keeping. There's talk around town about Harris and the plans he's setting in motion." Derek's eyes flickered with defiance mixed with regret. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat before replying, "I didn't come back to stir up old troubles, Lisa. I came back because I realized I've been lost for too long. Maybe I can still make things right." That admission marked a turning point, a small but significant step toward reconciling the personal past with the larger conflict threatening the community. Meanwhile, at the community center, the simmering tension was giving way to new bonds among the younger residents. Marcus, whose inner conflict had grown more pronounced with every passing day, began meeting secretly with Jasmine and Tyler after school. They gathered in a secluded corner of the center, poring over handwritten notes and local maps. Their conversations, once marked by uncertainty, now took on the tentative shape of a plan. "We need to figure out what Harris's real objective is," Marcus urged, his voice steadier than before. "If we can understand his strategy, maybe we can counteract it." Jasmine, who had long harbored doubts about the radical rhetoric that had initially drawn her in, nodded in agreement. Their collaboration gradually evolved into a pact, a promise that regardless of the pressures from their peers, they would seek a way out of the cycle of violence and manipulation. This unexpected alliance among the youth became a beacon of hope, suggesting that the next generation might be capable of forging a different path. Tom, ever the pragmatic observer, found his own role expanding as he reached out to other community veterans and retired law enforcement officers. Recognizing that the threat was no longer confined to isolated acts of vandalism, he organized informal gatherings where residents could share information and devise collective strategies. One such meeting, held in the back room of a local diner, saw the participation of several key figures, including Mr. Whitman and even a tentative representative from the Clark's faction. Although old rivalries still simmered beneath the surface, the shared goal of protecting the neighborhood created an atmosphere of cautious cooperation. "We may have our differences, Mr. Whitman conceded during a heated discussion, but if we let this chaos take over, none of us will have anything left to fight for." His words resonated deeply, helping to bridge the gap between factions that had long been at odds. Back at home, Jack continued to balance his dual roles as investigator and protector. His late-night sessions in the study grew longer, filled with meticulous note-taking and cross-referencing of every scrap of evidence he had collected. The jacket with Colonel Harris's emblem, remained his most damning piece of evidence, but he now also had testimonies from trusted neighbors, fragmented recordings of intercepted conversations, and even digital traces that hinted at an organized network operating in the shadows. With every new connection he made, Jack felt the weight of responsibility intensify, but so did his resolve to bring clarity to the chaos. One rainy evening, as Jack reviewed his notes in the quiet of his study, a sudden knock at the door startled him. It was Mrs. Peterson, clutching a faded photograph in trembling hands. "Jack," she said, her voice soft yet urgent, "I found this among some old belongings. It's a picture of Colonel Harris with a group of men who look too similar to the ones I've seen around recently." The photograph, yellowed by time but still vivid in detail, provided an unexpected link between the past and the present. Jack's eyes narrowed as he examined the image. It was a tangible reminder that the roots of this uprising extended far deeper than he had previously imagined. The connection between Harris's military past and the current unrest was no longer circumstantial. It was documented in faded ink and captured smiles, now twisted by time and betrayal. As the community's various threads began to intertwine, the shared sense of purpose grew stronger. Conversations that once held suspicion now gradually transformed into collaborative planning sessions, where everyone from the retired officers to the conflicted teenagers contributed in their own way. The tension was still palpable, but in its place emerged a cautious optimism, a belief that even in the darkest of times, unity might pave the way for renewal. In the ensuing days, as subtle acts of defiance against Harris's network multiplied, and old scores were settled through dialogue rather than violence, Jack's investigations began to intersect more openly with these communal efforts. His path increasingly overlapped with those of the youths at the community center, the neighborhood elders, and even the reformed factions that once stood in bitter opposition. The neighborhood was no longer a collection of isolated stories, but a tapestry woven with threads of shared struggle, hope, and the quiet determination to reclaim a peace that had long been taken for granted. In the days following the intricate web of alliances and emerging subplots, the neighborhood reached a boiling point. The careful balance that had managed to hold back the tide of unrest was now fraying under the weight of accumulated grievances and the orchestrated actions of Colonel Harris's network. As tensions escalated, it became painfully clear that a critical turning point was imminent, one that would force every resident to take a stand. One humid evening, as a heavy, expectant silence settled over the community, a violent confrontation erupted at the heart of the neighborhood. At the local community center, a place that had once been a hub for tentative cooperation, a group of masked figures attempted to vandalize the building. Their swift, coordinated actions left graffiti and shattered windows in their wake. The actee, though seemingly symbolic, was a declaration. The controlled chaos engineered by Harris's operatives was no longer an abstract threat, but an aggressive, tangible reality. Jackie O.C., who had been meticulously piecing together the puzzle in his study, was alerted by the sound of breaking glass and panicked shouts. He raced out the door, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. Outside, he found the community center in disarray. Neighbors had gathered in small clusters, some trying to shield the building, others watching in stunned silence. The attack was more than mere vandalism. It was an overt challenge to the community's unity and a signal that the orchestrated uprising was advancing beyond subtle hints and into open defiance. Amid the chaos, voices of protest and anger filled the air. Mr. Whitman and Mr. Clark, old adversaries who had once clashed over trivial matters, now found themselves side by side, their shared outrage pushing aside old grudges. "This is our home," Mr. Whitman bellowed, his voice resonant with authority as he urged everyone to rally together. "We cannot allow fear to divide us when an external enemy is tearing us apart." At the same time, within the remnants of the shattered community center, Marcus, Jasmine, and Tyler, once caught between conflicting allegiances, stepped forward. Their earlier secret meetings had matured into a clear resolve. Marcus, tries with an intensity that belied his youth, declared, "We need to expose these actions for what they are, a diversion to mask a larger scheme. Our neighborhood deserves better, and we must be the ones to take a stand." Their impassioned words galvanized the nearby residents, sparking an outpouring of collective defiance against the vandalism and the impending threat. As the confrontation unfolded, Jack's mind raced back to the evidence he had gathered. The discarded jacket with Colonel Harris's emblem, the intercepted conversations, and the whispered names, all pointed toward a deliberate plan to destabilize the community. Now, with the attack on the community center as a catalyst, it was clear that Harris's network was accelerating its plans. Jack knew that this was the moment when inaction would no longer be an option. He swiftly organized a group of trusted allies, including Tom, who had been rallying former military and law enforcement contacts, and a few brave neighbors who had decided that they could no longer stand on the sidelines. A makeshift command center was set up in the back room of the diner, where urgent discussions turned into decisive plans. Tom's voice cut through the tension as he stated, "The vandalism isn't random. It's designed to fracture our unity and weaken our defenses. We must respond with a united front." Strategies were quickly formed to secure vulnerable areas, reinforce communication channels with local authorities, and, most importantly, counteract the propaganda spreading through social media and word of mouth. Meanwhile, Lisa's personal subplot came to a head when Derek, her estranged brother, was spotted near the scene of the vandalism. Caught between his desire to reintegrate and his pull towards Harris's cause, Derek found himself at a crossroads. In a moment of crisis, as he observed the unfolding chaos, his eyes met Lisa's, a silent plea for redemption. Their exchange, brief yet potent, highlighted the personal battles intertwined with the larger conflict. Derek's internal struggle symbolized the potential for transformation, but it also underscored the urgent need for guidance in a community on the verge of collapse. As night deepened, the crescendo of conflicting emotions, fractured loyalties, and raw determination painted a picture of a community pushed to its limits. The vandalism of the community center was no longer an isolated incident, but a harbinger of the all-out confrontation that was about to engulf the neighborhood. The collective actions of Harris's network had crossed a threshold, and every resident now faced the stark reality that the time for decisive action was now. Jack, standing amidst the debris and chaos, felt the full weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. The battle lines were drawn, not only between Harris's operatives and the community defenders, but also within the hearts of those who had been torn between personal loyalties and the call to protect their home. It was in this charged atmosphere, where fear battled with courage and unity was forged in the crucible of crisis, that the stage was set for an impending climax, a confrontation that would determine not only the fate of the community, but also the soul of every individual within it. As the early hours of the next day crept in, the fallout from the community center's vandalism had shifted from isolated incidents to a full-blown standoff between Harris's network and the local residents. In the aftermath of the previous night's chaos, the air was thick with tension, uncertainty, and the sense that decisive actions had become inevitable. Jack gathered with his core group of allies, Tom, Mrs. Peterson, Mr. Whitman, and a few other resolute neighbors, in the back room of the diner, which had now been transformed into a makeshift war room. Maps of the neighborhood were pinned to the walls, annotated with strategic notes and highlighted danger zones. Tom, his face set in a determined scowl, addressed the group. "We're at a crossroads. Harris's operatives are growing bolder by the minute. We need to decide. Do we wait for the next act of sabotage, or do we take the initiative to confront them head-on?" In that moment, every face in the room reflected the weight of their collective decision. The prospect of a direct confrontation was fraught with risk. Not only could it escalate the violence, but it also risked fracturing the fragile unity that had begun to coalesce in response to the threat. Yet as Jack spoke, his voice was unwavering. "We can't allow fear to paralyze us. Every day we wait, our community's spirit weakens. It's time we act decisively." Outside, on the streets, the tension had reached a fever pitch. Groups of residents formed small patrols, while others gathered at key intersections and community hubs, their eyes scanning every shadow and suspicious movement. The once quiet avenues were now a battleground of wills, with each side preparing for what was to come. At the center of this maelstrom, a crucial confrontation unfolded at the very heart of the neighborhood, a derelict warehouse that had become the rumored operational hub for Harris's network. Jack, flanked by a trusted few, approached the building with caution and resolve. The warehouse loomed in the early morning light, its broken windows and graffiti-laden walls standing as a symbol of the disruption sown into the community. Every step closer to the entrance heightened the stakes, as both sides seemed poised for a clash that could not be averted. Inside, a cadre of masked figures was gathered around a hastily assembled table, their eyes fixed on a crude map of the town. The atmosphere was charged with an unsettling calm, a prelude to the storm that was about to break. It wasn't long before the silence was shattered by the sound of a door being kicked open. Jack's team, moving with military precision, burst into the room. The sudden intrusion sent the conspirators scrambling. In that charged moment, shouts and the clatter of hurried movements filled the space. Jack's voice rang out, commanding yet compassionate. "This ends now. We're not here to cause needless harm, only to stop the destruction of our home." His words resonated even as chaos reigned around him. Among the masked figures, a young man stepped forward, his face a mix of defiance and regret. It was Marcus, one of the conflicted teenagers whose internal struggle had been documented in earlier conversations. His eyes met Jack's, and in that silent exchange, the weight of his own choices became painfully evident. Marcus's decision at that moment would pivot the balance. I didn't want it to go this far," he stammered, lowering his gaze as if the realization of his part in the mayhem struck him like a physical blow. The ambivalence in his voice was a stark contrast to the steely determination of Jack and his allies. Recognizing an opportunity to defuse the situation, Jack offered, "There's still time to choose a different path, Marcus. Help us restore peace rather than tearing it further apart." The tension in the room began to shift subtly. Some of the conspirators hesitated, their expressions betraying inner conflict as they weighed the possibility of redemption. Meanwhile, Tom's steady presence at Jack's side reinforced the message that this was not merely a punitive strike, but a chance to reclaim dignity and rebuild trust. As voices rose in heated debate, the scene transformed into a crucible of decision-making. Every argument, every plea, became a pivot point that would decide whether the neighborhood would spiral further into chaos or rally for a unified future. Outside the warehouse, the community watched with bated breath. Neighbors huddled together, some clutching makeshift signs of support, while others simply prayed for an end to the violence. The stakes were not just about the physical safety of the residents, they were about the soul of the community. The outcome of this confrontation would reverberate far beyond these walls, setting the tone for the future of everyone involved. After what felt like an eternity, a fragile calm began to settle over the warehouse. A number of the masked conspirators, moved by the unexpected plea for unity, signaled their willingness to step back and engage in dialogue. Marcus, emboldened by Jack's unwavering stance and the possibility of redemption, looked around and nodded to his peers. "Maybe we've been following the wrong orders all along," he murmured, the words heavy with meaning. His admission rippled through the room, softening hardened expressions and paving the way for negotiations. In that charged environment, where anger, fear, and hope intermingled, the community took its first decisive step toward reclaiming control. The confrontation was not resolved with a final, victorious blow, but with an uneasy truce, a promise that, while the battle for the neighborhood's soul was far from over, the path toward reconciliation had been laid. Decisions made in that warehouse echoed the community's collective will, to stand together against the forces of division and to forge a future where every individual had a stake in restoring peace. The uneasy truce in the warehouse was a fragile beginning, a temporary pause before the final storm. In the days that followed, the community felt the pressure mounting as every passing hour deepened the division between those still loyal to Colonel Harris's shadow network and those determined to restore peace. The atmosphere became electric with anticipation and uncertainty, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting for the final act of this unfolding drama. Jack found little respite. Each morning, as the sun rose over quiet streets that had grown all too familiar with tension, he sensed that the calm was merely the lull before a decisive confrontation. The once still air was now charged with murmurs of dissent and cautious hope. In his study, surrounded by scattered documents, intercepted communications, and the weathered jacket that had become the symbol of betrayal, Jack planned his next move with unwavering determination. His resolve was fueled by the thought that every moment of delay allowed the enemy to tighten its grip on the community's spirit. Late one afternoon, as storm clouds gathered overhead, a call to action echoed through the neighborhood. A series of coordinated incidents, sabotage of local utilities, manipulated broadcasts warning of impending chaos, and even small-scale skirmishes on the periphery signaled that Harris's network was making its final push to destabilize the community completely. With these unsettling events unfolding, Jack knew that the peak of tension was upon them. In the heart of the neighborhood, the community center, now scarred by previous vandalism, transformed into a makeshift rallying point. Under the dim glow of streetlights, a hurried assembly of residents, neighbors, local veterans, and even some of the reformed youth gathered. Their faces were etched with worry and determination as they listened to impassioned speeches calling for unity. Mr. Whitman, who had once been locked in bitter disputes with Mr. Clark, now stood shoulder to shoulder with him, symbolizing the community's readiness to bridge old divides. "We must be the light that drives out the darkness," Mr. Whitman declared, his voice resonating across the silent crowd. At that moment, Jack arrived, and his presence commanding attention. He stood at the center of the gathered group, eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for the courage in each face. "We have come too far to let fear and hatred tear us apart," he said, his voice steady yet laced with urgency. "Today, we make a choice, not only for ourselves but for the future of our children. We choose unity over division, action over despair." Simultaneously, across town, Colonel Harris's influence was reaching a crescendo. Rumors spread that he was orchestrating a final, major strike, a demonstration of power designed to force the community into submission. The very thought of Harris mobilizing his remaining operatives for a climactic showdown sent tremors through those who still opposed him. In darkened rooms, hushed conversations turned into heated debates about the best course of action. For some, the idea of an all-out battle against a former mentor was unthinkable. For others, it was the only way to reclaim a stolen future. The tension reached its zenith one stormy night, when an anonymous tip warned of an imminent large-scale attack on a major community landmark, a historic park that had long been a symbol of the neighborhood's unity and resilience. The news spread rapidly, electrifying the already jittery residents. Emergency meetings were convened at every possible venue. Jack and his closest allies, including Tom, Mrs. Peterson, and a contingent of reformed local youths led by Marcus, prepared to defend not just a physical space, but the very spirit of their community. As night fell, the sky was a swirling canvas of dark clouds and intermittent flashes of lightning. Every sound, the distant roll of thunder, the patter of rain on rooftops, even the hushed whispers of anxious residents, contributed to the sense that something monumental was about to occur. Jack Imbay, standing with his team at the edge of the park, felt his heart hammering in unison with the pulsing anticipation of the crowd. Every step he took was a testament to years of resolve, sacrifice, and the burden of memories that had driven him to this point. In that electric moment, the stage was set. The community, long fragmented by old wounds and new threats, now stood united against the looming specter of tyranny represented by Harris's network. Every decision made, every alliance formed, and every personal sacrifice had converged at this pivotal juncture. It was as if the very soul of the neighborhood was poised on the edge of a knife, with destiny hanging in the balance. Jack's voice, firm and resolute, broke through the tension. "Tonight we stand together. No more divisions, no more fear. We reclaim our home, our future, and our honor." The words stirred a renewed determination among the crowd, unifying every individual in a single, powerful purpose. The final confrontation was imminent, and every heart beat with the promise of a resolution that would determine the course of their lives. The storm reached its crescendo on that fateful night. Heavy rain pounded the streets, and the relentless wind howled as if echoing the anger of a betrayed community. At the historic park, the symbolic heart of the neighborhood, Jack and his assembled defenders braced for what would be the final confrontation. Every resident who had ever felt the sting of loss or the weight of fear had gathered here, united by a singular purpose: to reclaim their home. Under the tumultuous sky, the park's pathways were lit sporadically by flashes of lightning that revealed determined faces and clenched fists. Jack stood at the forefront, his silhouette a beacon of unwavering resolve amid the chaos. His eyes, hardened by years of battle and loss, scanned the horizon for any sign of movement. Beside him, Tom and Marcus, once reluctant participants in a larger scheme, now embodied the fierce hope of redemption as they prepared to confront the looming enemy. In the distance, the murmur of Harris's operatives grew louder, a calculated crescendo orchestrated to break the spirit of the community. As the enemy advanced, their presence was heralded by the thud of heavy boots and the clatter of makeshift weapons. The group was led by a figure whose presence exuded authority and menace, a man whose identity was intertwined with betrayal. It was Colonel Harris himself, his eyes cold and calculating beneath the brim of his weathered cap, flanked by his loyal followers. His arrival was the ultimate test of the community's resolve. Without a moment's hesitation, Jack stepped forward, his voice cutting through the roaring wind. "This ends tonight," he declared, his tone both commanding and compassionate. His words seemed to suspend time itself as every eye in the crowd fixed upon him. The enemy halted, momentarily taken aback by the fearless leader confronting them. A fierce standoff ensued. On one side stood Harris's network, trained, disciplined, and fueled by a twisted sense of retribution, and on the other, a ragtag but resolute coalition of neighbors, veterans, and reformed youths who had chosen unity over despair. The tension was palpable, a mix of anticipation, anger, and hope that electrified the air. The first blow came not from a weapon, but from a powerful declaration. Marcus, his voice trembling with both fear and conviction, stepped into the fray. "We will not be divided by your lies," he cried, addressing his former comrades. His words struck a chord deep within many of the enemy ranks, and a murmur of doubt passed among them. For years, Harris had exploited their grievances, twisting them into a weapon against the community. But now, the unity displayed by Jack and his allies was challenging the foundation of his control. Harris's eyes narrowed, and with a bitter sneer, he signaled his men to attack. The ensuing clash was a maelstrom of shouts, the clash of improvised weapons against makeshift shields, and the visceral sound of determination colliding with oppression. Jack moved like a force of nature amid the chaos, each movement measured and deliberate. His experience in battle shone through as he parried blows, deflected attacks, and Chell, with a calm that belied the tumult around him, urged his allies to hold their ground. Every confrontation was punctuated by the raw emotions of a community fighting for its very soul. Neighbors who had once exchanged only polite greetings now fought side by side, their differences set aside in the face of an undeniable threat. Mr. Whitman and Mr. Clark, who had once been bitter rivals, locked arms as they defended a fallen elder, symbolizing the mending of old wounds under the banner of shared purpose. As the battle raged on, the park transformed into an arena where the past and present collided. Every shattered piece of wood, every dent in a makeshift barrier, was a testament to the price of freedom. Amid the clamor, Jack caught sight of Harris moving stealthily toward a control panel that appeared to be rigged to send a message of further chaos, a final act of defiance. Without a second thought, Jack surged forward. Their eyes met, Harris's cold and calculating, Jack's fierce and unyielding, and in that silent exchange, the weight of all that had been lost and all that was at stake hung palpably between them. The confrontation between Jack and Harris was swift and intense. Words were exchanged. Bitter reminders of past loyalties turned sour, and accusations of betrayal that resonated with the crowd. In a moment that felt both inevitable and transcendent, Jack disarmed Harris, not with brute force alone, but with a decisive move that left the colonel vulnerable and exposed. The enemy, now leaderless and in disarray, began to falter. One by one, the followers hesitated, then slowly, their weapons lowering as doubt replaced blind obedience. The storm outside seemed to mirror the turmoil within, the raging winds subsiding as a cautious calm spread over the battlefield. In the midst of the aftermath, Jack extended a hand toward Harris, his voice soft yet firm. "It doesn't have to end in more pain. Let's rebuild what we've lost." For a heartbeat, silence reigned, a fragile pause where the future hung in the balance. That night, as the first signs of dawn crept over the storm-battered park, the battle's echoes began to fade. The enemy had retreated, their organized force disintegrated by the overwhelming unity of a community determined to protect its future. In the aftermath, survivors tended to the wounded, embraced lost friends, and began the arduous process of healing. Jack, his gaze lingering on the horizon, knew that this victory was not just a military one. It was a reclaiming of hope, a testament to the strength of unity in the face of betrayal. As dawn fully broke over the neighborhood, the aftermath of the night's fierce battle slowly revealed the true strength of a community united in purpose. The historic park, scarred yet dignified, stood as a testament to resilience. Neighbors gathered amid the gentle light of morning, tending to the wounded, sharing quiet words of comfort, and beginning the process of rebuilding not just their surroundings, but also the trust that had been so brutally tested. Jack Stevens, still in the remnants of his battle-worn jacket, walked slowly through the park. Every step was a reminder of the sacrifices made and the harsh lessons learned during those turbulent hours. The chaos of the night had given way to a reflective calm, a silence filled with both sorrow for the losses endured and hope for a renewed future. He paused before a broken bench, its splintered wood a symbol of the fragmentation that had once threatened to tear the community apart. Yet in that same moment, he saw a group of residents, young and old, collaborating to repair it. Their careful, deliberate efforts echoed a shared belief that from the remnants of division, a stronger unity could be forged. Across the park, Marcus and his friends, once caught in the crossfire of radical ambition and inner conflict, worked together with other youths to paint over the scars of vandalism. Their collaboration, marked by hesitant smiles and the tentative bonding of common purpose, spoke volumes about the transformative power of second chances. Even Lisa, whose personal struggle with her brother Derek had caused ripples of fear, was seen gently guiding him as he helped replant a row of vibrant flowers near the park's entrance, a symbolic act of regrowth and redemption. Inside the community center, now quiet in the early morning hours, a mosaic of mended walls and shared memories was taking shape. The echoes of yesterday's confrontation still lingered in every corner, but they were now interlaced with new commitments. Tom, Mrs. Peterson, Mr. Whitman, Mr. Clark, and others sat in a circle, their faces marked by both exhaustion and determination, discussing plans to establish a permanent neighborhood watch, create a support network for local youth, and restore public spaces to their former, harmonious state. Jack listened as voices rose in conversation, each person contributing their ideas for a safer, more connected community. "We've seen what happens when fear divides us," one elderly man said softly, "and what we can achieve when we stand together." His words resonated deeply with everyone present. In that small but significant moment, the collective realization dawned. True strength was not in the capacity to wage conflict, but in the willingness to heal and rebuild. In the weeks that followed, the community worked tirelessly. Small acts of kindness and cooperation became the norm. Neighborhood cleanups, community potlucks, and local storytelling sessions filled the calendar. Each event, whether big or small, served as a reminder that even in the wake of betrayal and violence, the spirit of unity could prevail. The scars left by Harris's treachery were slowly mending, replaced by the vibrant tapestry of resilience woven by every individual's commitment to a better future. For Jack, the journey had been both a confrontation with his past and a profound lesson in the power of forgiveness and hope. Though the pain of betrayal still lingered, it no longer defined him. Instead, it had become the catalyst for a mission greater than his own personal history. A mission to safeguard not only his daughter's future, but also the future of every member of his community. As he gazed upon the rejuvenated park and the smiling faces of neighbors working together, he knew that the battle for unity was a continuous one, built on small victories and the relentless determination to rise above the darkness. Before he departed from the park one final time that morning, Jack addressed a small gathering of community members and friends. His voice, steady and sincere, carried a message that was both a reflection and a call to action. "We've learned that our strength lies in our unity, and together we can overcome even the darkest of challenges. Let this be a reminder that every single one of us has a role to play in protecting the bonds that make us a family. Our journey doesn't end here. It only marks the beginning of a new chapter, where each act of kindness, each effort to bridge divides, builds the foundation for a future defined not by fear, but by hope." As the group dispersed with renewed resolve, Jack couldn't help but feel a surge of optimism. The battle was over, but the legacy of that night would serve as a constant reminder of the importance of vigilance, compassion, and community. Now, he turned his gaze to the future, a future where every challenge could be met with the strength of collective will. And so, to all those who have followed this journey, remember, the story of our community is not just one of conflict and redemption. It is an ongoing call to action. If you believe in the power of unity and the promise of hope, subscribe to our channel, Share your own stories of resilience and join us as we continue to explore what it truly means to stand together. Because every act of courage, every moment of unity, contributes to a brighter tomorrow.